So I've just spent the past I don't want to know how long counting every single chair, arcade cabinet, and toilet, and now I'm on to the staff bots, and they've just disappeared. I don't know where they went. Wait, no, there's one over there. He's back now.
Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach is a game a lot of people love for a lot of wrong reasons, to which I am no exception. Specifically, I'm on record as stating, if this place existed in real life, I would be in jail for grinding up the atrium's drywall and trying to snort it. So because I enjoy just existing in this gorgeous space, I wanted an excuse to come back to this game. And despite the mountain of easy clickbait I could have dredged up, like why Security Breach is the Resident Evil Requiem of Five Nights at Freddy's. Wait, why aren't I making that video? The first thing my brain jumped to was, hey, let's do a financial audit. By that I mean, does the Security Breach MegaPizzaPlex actually make money? Does it turn a profit at the end of the year, or is it just a giant money pit designed to resurrect a creepy zombie rabbit? Or I guess a psychotic robot who's LARPing as a creepy zombie rabbit for some reason. That's still such a stupid twist. Now, if you're thinking that I'm the kind of guy to just throw up a bunch of vague numbers, make some random guesses, and leave you with a, maybe kind of answer, let me offer you this rebuttal. 3 Excel workbooks, multiple sheets, formulas, so many sources, manually counting every single chair and arcade cabinet in the MegaPizzaPlex, calling various companies to get equipment quotes. I literally drove my sister and I to a Dave & Buster's to count the number of toilets. That was extremely important. Conditional formatting. And unlike my Choo Choo Charles video, where I analyzed the rail network of Aranerum with basically zero expertise going in, I actually am qualified to analyze the business practices of the MegaPizzaPlex because this funny YouTube man has a master's in business analytics. And you want to know something depressing? This video will be the first time I actually use it. So I'm going to be attempting to provide you all with an exact dollar amount for the MegaPizzaPlex's net income after taxes. Now, before I hype myself up too much, there are certain variables I simply won't be able to account for, such as how many arcade cabinets are leased versus owned, or would Fazbear Inc. prefer to retain the incidence of ownership for the purposes of depreciation. But nonetheless, my background means I probably know how to accurately navigate the absolute circus that is financial reporting. And yes, that analogy is apt because, oh boy, are there some tax shenanigans going on. So let me introduce exactly how we're going to approach the finances of Freddy Fazbear's Furry Emporium. The Fazbear Incorporated MegaPizzaPlex Annual Report, complete with balance sheet, income statement, PPE evaluations, payroll costs, income tax calculations, and so many citations that you could probably use this video in a finance course. So sit your ass down and start taking notes, because I'm Professor Cheesine and class is in session. Because this reality sucks, I can't just walk up to the MegaPizzaPlex and say, I'll take one VIP pass for Chica's room, please. Or to phrase it more relevantly to this video, excuse me, how much does a VIP pass for Chica's room cost? So instead, we need a real-world analog to model our data off of. And for that, I present to you the Dave & Buster's Annual Report. This is what we're going to be using as our base to make the MegaPizzaPlex Annual Report. Now, I'm not just going to be lifting numbers from here and pasting them onto the Pizzaplex, but we can use this as a kind of skeleton, and Dave & Buster's is a good fit. Both are considered family entertainment centers, or FECs, and both heavily feature arcades and food. Obviously, there are some differences. For example, Dave & Buster's has no expenses related to animatronics, which the MegaPizzaPlex obviously would have. And in fact, it may be an incredibly important part of this video. And thus, I've added animatronic expense as its own line item. In turn, I've left certain values off the balance sheet, such as treasury stock or stock buyback costs, because figuring out a company's current stock valuation is subject to like 27 different external market forces and the whims of Satan himself. So because I'd rather keep my soul, I'll spare myself the pain of becoming a day trader and focus solely on the MegaPizzaPlex and the operations within. So with that in mind, let's take a closer look at what is going to be our holy text. While the balance sheet is typically considered the most important part of a financial report, at least when it comes to raw numbers, the aforementioned lack of stock info, as well as a few other line items, means we can't really rely on the balance sheet to give us a full picture. Yes, I know, I wanted to figure out the debt to equity ratio too. I mean, I really did, it's a pretty good number. Instead, we're going to be focusing on the income statement, which is a better overview of how much money the day-to-day operations and costs of doing business stack up. To figure this, there are 4 numbers we need. Total revenues, or how much cash the MegaPizzaPlex takes in before any expenses. Total cost of products, which is how much it costs to maintain and run all the equipment that directly generates revenue, such as food or animatronics. Total operating costs, which accounts for all costs not directly tied to revenue generation. And finally, taxes, which includes both income and property taxes. Yes, I'm calculating those. They are very relevant. No, I'm not obsessed, I'm just passionate. These These all factor into net income, how much cash the MegaPizzaPlex will walk away with at the end of the day, all on a yearly basis. Each of these numbers are going to be calculated in various other sheets of our holy bearable. But enough with all this technical jargon, let's talk about how I'm gonna crack open the MegaPizzaPlex and feast on the gooey numbers inside. I have spent hours scrounging around the Pizzaplex, poking my nose into every restaurant, counting chairs, enumerating robots, estimating crowd sizes, looking at menus, calculating the net worth of Chica's ass. I'm only partially kidding there, and while all this counting may seem arbitrary, my plan is to use the number of chairs, arcade cabinets, and toilets to create a kind of scale. And speaking of scale, it's time for our first and probably most dramatic item on this list, the physical size of the MegaPizzaPlex. Now, figuring out accurate scales in video games is actually very difficult and involves complicated math like trigonometry, calculus, advanced geometry, and oh, thank God somebody already figured it out. One clever little mouse named Maz,
My source is my...
managed to make a rough estimate of the MegaPizzaPlex's size by using the game's bowling alleys as a giant measuring stick. And what Maz found is that the MegaPizzaPlex is basically my ideal woman because it is aggressively large. How large? Well, the MegaPizzaPlex's overall layout is often compared to a shopping mall, so let's whip out some rulers and have a Dick's Sporting Good measuring contest. According to the International Council of Shopping Malls, which sounds like some Illuminati shit, the largest type of shopping malls are called super regional malls. If you picture one of those typical mega malls that popped up in the 80s and 90s, or for my younger viewers, those giant decaying buildings where people make urban exploration videos, these clock in at about 800,000 square feet. So what did Maz measure the Pizzaplex at? 1,605,270 square feet, or 36.85 acres, more than double the size of a typical mega mall. For a closer comparison, this would place the MegaPizzaPlex at roughly the same size as the football stadium for the Philadelphia Eagles. God, I want to go to this place. The MegaPizzaPlex, I mean, not the Eagles Stadium. I'm a Southern boy, we watch college. Thankfully, we do have a more practical example, that of Lenox Mall, which clocks in at about 1.5 million square feet. Yes, I am using this specific mall because I can drive to it. It's where I got these fly-ass shoes. Knowing the acreage of the MegaPizzaPlex, and yes, I'm using acreage because acreage is a fun word to say, we can calculate several values in our holy Faz text, or if you prefer, our Torador. The most obvious is land value, but for that, we need to know where the MegaPizzaPlex is located. Thankfully, we have something that is incredibly rare in the FNAF world, an actual straightforward, no bullshit answer. Looking at court documents from Pizza Sim, as well as further confirmation from the books, or if I'm being honest, looking up the books on the wiki, we know that Pizza Sim takes place in Hurricane, Utah, a town known for two things, Mormons and mispronouncing the word hurricane. Fortunately, we also know that, as of writing this script, the MegaPizzaPlex was built on the remains of that same Pizza Sim location. This allows us to calculate several financials directly. First, let's get back to land value. Looking around at empty lots in Hurricane, Utah, I was able to find several properties of similar acreage. Averaging out these numbers, I was able to land on a value of $6,622,000. But land value is only part of a property's value, and thus a property's taxes. We still need to figure out the value of the building itself. Now, since I'm not a real estate speculator, who we all know are the absolute worst kinds of people according to Akira Toriyama, we are going to use our first instance of the Dave and Buster's scale. In 2025, a roughly 5-acre Dink and Binkley's was built that cost about $7.5 million to build. Scaling that to the Pizzaplex at a size ratio of 7.37, we can get a construction cost of $55.2 million. But once again, we're not done because construction cost does not equal building value. The National Association of Home Builders found that the base value of a building, so not accounting for land, location, or other extrinsic values, was valuated at about 64.4% of its construction cost. So, shoving all these numbers and ratios together, we get a final building value of roughly $35.5 million, and combined with the land value, a final property value of $42.2 million. In turn, this allows us to calculate property tax. We have a flat property tax rate of 0.635% for a property tax cost of $268,000. That's some pretty nice progress, but also probably not what you came here for. Well, I have good news, because those were the last of the numbers I could get just by sitting on my ass and using Google. Now I have to sit on my ass and get exact counts of the chairs, crowd sizes, number of arcade cabinets, endos, chicas, bus side, food prices. Yep, it's finally time. We're going back to the Pizzaplex. Stepping back into these neon-lit halls, we come here not as a frightened child, but as a frightened surveyor, because our first task is perhaps our most important and most complicated, calculating yearly guest attendance. Now, we have a trio of ways to chew through this meaty bone of a problem. To start, let's try to get a handle on maximum guest capacity. Unfortunately, the only shot of this place we get while populated is during a concert, which I'm pretty sure only happens once a night if we go by the words of the least attractive woman in this game.
You totally blew it tonight, you know. Your system crashed and you ruined the show.
I think I can speak for everyone when I say that she goes from a 7 to a 9 when she puts on the costume. In addition, I really don't want to try to count the number of featureless heads across several chaotically moving shots, so instead I'm going to take the easier route of counting literally everything else. Now, I'm not going to turn this into an Any Austin video and document the counting of literally everything one by one, mostly because that sexy beast typically only counts the populations of small villages. But I will be using this footage as nifty B-roll while I tell you about the literally hundreds of chairs, arcade cabinets, and toilets I had to count to make this video. To give you an idea of scale, a Dave & Buster's requires a location to have a minimum seating capacity of 50 on the arcade floor and 200 more for special events. So what about the MegaPizzaPlex? Well, I indeed did count every last thing that could be counted as a chair, but I also want to step beyond that to account for the larger seating capacity of couches and benches. Again, I'm not obsessed, I'm just passionate. These couches, for example, could easily seat 3 and these benches around 2. So to make things as accurate as possible, I accounted for each and every one of these by assigning each different type of sitting implement a seat value. For example, in Chica's Bakery, I counted 39 chairs, each of which had a seat value of 1, whereas the 8 benches would have a seat value of 2, bringing the total seating capacity in Chica's Bakery to 39 plus 8 times 2, or 55. And now I want to note that this one area that the game never requires you to go to already has more seating capacity than the starting number for a Dave & Buster's. One thing to note is that I only counted seating in public areas, as the seats in a back office aren't going to matter for the guest cap. But that still left me to count every restaurant, every party room, every floor. I have literally hours of footage of this, and I refuse to calculate how much of my life I spent on this. But enough stalling, what was the number? What is the final seating capacity of the MegaPizzaPlex? 2,272. Roughly 9 times the full amount of seating at a Dave & Buster's and double the attendance of your average Braves game. So now our job is easy. We just take that daily attendance of Dave & Buster's and multiply it by that same scale that I... No! Oh no, I'm just kidding. It's gonna be way more complicated than that. For one, Dave & Buster's doesn't make its attendance numbers public, and trust me, I looked. The only thing I could find was a sketchy AI website that was using phone tracking to try to guess at it, and that just felt gross, so no. And besides, I still have 2 more counts on this spreadsheet I need to talk about because they're both very important. The arcade value is similar to the seat value. The Pizzaplex has a mix of single player, 2-player, 4-player, and honest to God 6-player arcade cabinets, all of which I assign an arcade value just like I did the various seats, couches, and chairs. After counting every arcade cabinet and sending it through the same Excel calculations as the chairs, so you know I'm a pro at this because it only takes me 3 tries to get VLOOKUP to work, I ended up with a maximum entertainment capacity of 2,034, which, hey, keeps pretty darn consistent with the Dave & Buster's metric. Where the MegaPizzaPlex had about 9 times the seating of a Dave & Buster's, the MegaPizzaPlex also has about 10 times the games. The last metric we have is the bathroom count, and that's not exactly information Dave & Buster's publishes on their website. So yes, it's time for Cheese Yean's Dave & Buster's bathroom journey.
Dave & Buster's. It's a bus named Dave.
I'd really try not to think about the fact that I drove my sister and I to a Dave & Buster's with the explicit purpose of counting toilets. But the counts were 13 in the men's, 8 in the women's, for a total of 21 to the MegaPizzaPlex's 133, which is only about 6 times more, but honestly, that's kind of what I expected. Despite both buildings being FECs, the MegaPizzaPlex's restrooms would follow guidelines closer to a mall due to its size. But honestly, the biggest surprise about the bathrooms in the MegaPizzaPlex is how they were way nicer than the ones at Dave & Buster's. Like, I didn't film in there because I don't want to be put on a list, but you know that weird sticky air you get in like a gas station bathroom? Yeah, that. But now that we have all these numbers between chairs, arcades, and toilets, what do we actually do with them? Well, to make Nintendo Capri Sun happy, let's start with the toilets. A large complex like a shopping mall would require 1 toilet per 500 male customers, plus 1 more toilet for every additional 1,000, where for females it also starts with 1 toilet per 500, with 1 per 200 following that. During my survey, I found that the FNAF bathrooms had almost equal stall numbers, sometimes differing by only having 1 less stall in the adjacent women's room if there was a difference at all. So we can split this value in half to save me from having to go back and remember where every single bathroom was just to change 2 values by exactly 1. Yes, I'm aware of the value of accurate data, but ROI applies to the cost of data acquisition too, buddy. This gives us the following calculation to reach a total toilet capacity of 80,000 guests. For reference, that is double the actual capacity of an Atlanta Braves game. Now, am I saying that this is the actual expected guest capacity of the MegaPizzaPlex? No, not even close. Remember, the MegaPizzaPlex is a pig-punchingly massive facility, so it's going to need more restrooms not because of guest capacity, but just because of its geographic footprint. But that does at least give us some kind of ceiling. So let's move on from wiping butts to seating them and talk about sitting capacity. This one actually stumped me for a bit until I realized something kind of interesting with how the seating is laid out in the MegaPizzaPlex, namely, how it all makes a lot of sense. Again, the level of detail in this game is tragically impressive. Poppy Playtime, you ain't got shit on the Faz, and I would know since I played Poppy Playtime on a new channel that goes live tomorrow, but you can subscribe to it right now. Cheese Yeet Unleashed, a channel where I play games where you can watch moments like this.
No, don't be dead. Please, be alive and try to kill me. Yes! Oh, it's got a knife.
Or this.
And now I feel like a vampire counting rice. I need to analyze this. And look at these wheels. These wheels are wrong immediately. They're not even... Not even on the track.
Or how about this one?
You know, if this wasn't a horror game, that guy would absolutely be a Tumblr sexy man.
Okay, that's the end of the plug. Cheesy and Unleashed. Go subscribe. Link in the description. I'll remind you later just in case. Mwah. Back to the chairs. The seating is either placed around eating areas, restaurants, or at logical places nearby snack shops. And this is exactly what you would expect to see in a place like this because of a concept called seating turnover. Seating turnover is a term used for how long it takes a person to sit down and then vacate a seat. In a place like a theater or concert hall, this will obviously take several hours, and that's fine. In events like those, you're effectively paying for the right to sit down in one of those seats. At a place like a family entertainment center or a mall, however, every moment a guest is sitting down is a second they're not walking around and spending money. Thus, these places want a much lower turnover time or a higher turnover rate. And what do we see here? We see the MegaPizzaPlex using a lot of high turnover strategies, placing standing tables with no seats, which I did count as 2 seats, large communal tables, and tables in areas with high foot traffic. These are all the exact same tactics that many events in food courts used to encourage turnover. There are of course chairs or benches in other areas such as waiting rooms or observation areas, but these are relatively small in number. Because of that, we can use turnover metrics for a food court. And lucky little me, I found data that showed an average food court sees a seat used 6 times per day. If we round down our seating capacity to just 2,000 seats to account for seating in non-food areas, we can estimate that roughly 12,000 people will be seated for meals per day. But this 12,000 number isn't enough because not everyone who shows up to the MegaPizzaPlex is going to actually eat that day. I mean, I know I wouldn't unless I got a backstage pass at Chica's.
I summoned Prohibition Hammer.
Prohibition's only underestimated.
Going back to Dave & Buster's, only about 48% of guests actually ended up ordering food. So, using this same metric, we can say that 52% of people go to the MegaPizzaPlex just for the games and attractions. So, with some fancy maths, or rather math I learned in middle school and now only really use in Satisfactory, we can use this to estimate that the MegaPizzaPlex expects to see, at maximum, 25,000 people per day. However, I'm not quite willing to call it here. Remember, this number is only based off of meal seating, which is heavily skewed towards certain times of day. If we want a picture as full as Chica's, we need a more constant metric, and that is why I also counted the arcade cabinets. To recap, there are 698 active arcade cabinets in total. However, there's a bit of a break in reality here that I need to address. I want you, right now, to think of the last time you went to any kind of arcade. Notice anything different? Modern arcades heavily focus on quick play redemption games, those quick fixes where you can try your hand at one of those totally not rigged games for a huge payout. The reason these are so popular is because they offer extremely high turnover rates. These games usually last only about 30 seconds to 2 minutes and have that same, no, this time I got it, addiction of all those online gambling apps that YouTube is so willing to advertise. However, there were barely any quick redemption games in the MegaPizzaPlex. The closest thing I could find were a few claw games, but otherwise, the vast majority were traditional arcades. Now, these are still great moneymakers as they require very little maintenance and basically no staffing, which is something Fazbear Inc. is all about, but that's for later. As far as turnover, sources indicate an arcade cabinet averages about 17 guests per machine per hour, but this only accounts for single-player games, and not the 2, 4, or even 6-player arcade cabinets, which, yes, do exist, and is almost certainly modeled after the 6-player X-Men arcade game. There were absolutely some passionate people on this team. Doing some more calculations, we can estimate that the MegaPizzaPlex has an hourly arcade game throughput of 28,690 guests per hour. Now, this number is very skewed by the ridiculous number of 4-player cabinets, but considering the Pizzaplex heavily caters towards large parties, especially for younger children, I can see the logic here. Now, the other attractions such as Monty Golf, Phaser Blast, Bonnie Bowl, and Roxy Raceway contribute surprisingly little to the overall capacity. But to go over them briefly, Monty Golf has a full 18 holes, Phaser Blast holds games of up to 6v6 judging by the number of vests, Bonnie Bowl has 11 lanes with a maximum of 5 players per lane, judging by their scorecards, and Roxy Raceway has slots for 14 carts. These attractions were relatively easy to find data on, so using their various throughput numbers, I was able to find that Monty Golf added about 72 guests per hour, Phaedra Blast added 49, Bonnie Bowl added 73, Roxy Raceway added 84, for a total of 278 guests per hour, which I'm going to round up to an even 300 guests per hour for Major Size because I have no idea how I'd calculate this one. Now, this meager 300 guests per hour compared to the frankly ridiculous numbers provided by the arcades may seem odd, but once again, it is actually exactly what I'd expect. In the Family Entertainment Center biz, these are all known as core attractions, big ticket items that really draw in the crowds. These generate revenue, sure, but their main job is to get people in the door. And can I just say, hell yeah? Aside from the bowling alley, which is just a bowling alley, let's just take a look at the other attractions and be reminded that our reality is so fucking boring by comparison. Phaser Blast has multiple stories, every wall lights up, has tons of cover and multiple control points, not to mention NPC bots that explode just to add to your high score. Monty Golf has a full indoor 18 holes across 2 stories, incredibly complex theming, and amazingly intricate and fun-looking courses. Roxy Raceway has multiple levels and drives you over a ravine and into a cave, not to mention one of the other drivers might be a hot animatronic wolf. Any one of these core attractions would be massive draws, and not only does the MegaPizzaPlex have 4 of them, they are all of extremely high quality. Now you may be asking, hey wait a minute, what about Superstar Daycare? I need to see my beloved Moon Man. And to that I say, patience you thirsty beast. I was just getting to that. Unlike William Afton's short-lived butcher shop, the daycare isn't going to be tracking children processed per hour. Rather, the daycare is clearly designed for parents to drop off younger kids while the rest of them go to their main attractions. This is backed up by the fact that passes for the daycare don't require a pass into the atrium, which by the way is kind of genius. This allows for families even with very young children to show up, leave them with the scary bouncing jester, and then go enjoy themselves in the arcade. And thus, we can come to a final entertainment capacity per hour, combining the arcade and all core attractions, giving the bare-bustingly staggering number of 28,990 guests per hour, which is pretty damn close to the 25,000 metric based on seating. The fact that these numbers are so close isn't quite a slam dunk because we need to remember that this entertainment value is 29,000 guests per hour, whereas the seating value is 25,000 guests per day. So why the discrepancy? Demographics and time of day. The arcade cabinets are located in 3 areas. Going from smallest to largest, we have the arcade in Bonnie Bowl, Superstar Arcade in the atrium, and Fazcade in the dance hall. Since Superstar Arcade is in the atrium, this one is the most likely to see the most use consistently throughout the day. And this is backed up by the fact that this is where the prize counter is located. But why then have 2 separate arcades in both Bonnie Bowl and the dance floor? Because genius. Bonnie Bowl is far more family-oriented, with a cute 70s style diner and, well, bowling, which is a very family-oriented activity. The Fazcade, meanwhile, is definitely geared towards teenagers, with a far more open space, a DJ, neon theming, and private party rooms where Chica seems to frequent, so, you know, I'm down. These 2 demographics tend to be split in terms of times of day. Family activities typically take place around the morning or afternoon, whereas clubs are more active in the evening, which lets the Superstar Arcade act as more of a general attraction for people who just want to go to an arcade and win prizes. Thus, this 29,000 entertainment capacity is never going to be reached at any hour, meaning to get a better reflection of maximum guest capacity is by looking at each individual arcade itself. The easiest one to work with is the Fazcade, and we can use the same calculations as before to find that it has a maximum capacity of roughly 15,000 per hour. Considering that the peak window of a teen nightclub is about 2 hours, that gives us a peak hours capacity of roughly 30,000, which is now much closer to that peak seating capacity of 25,000 based on mealtime, and that's exactly what Daddy wants to see. That 25,000 guest capacity is now not only supported by external data, but also internally consistent with the game itself. Because of this, I can now confidently say that the MegaPizzaPlex expects to see roughly 25,000 guests per day during peak season. But what do we do with this number? How do we take this daily number and use it to figure out annual attendance? Well, the lazy way would be to multiply this number by 365 and call it at that. But I didn't spend hours of my life counting chairs to take the easy way out. No, to quote Simple Flips,
I got a better idea. How about doing anything but that?
Unfortunately for me, Dave & Buster's, and in fact most FECs, and in fact most everything ever, keeps their monthly attendance numbers locked up tighter than the door on a faulty Tesla. What Dank and Bussy does make public, however, is their quarterly reports. These reports are published by most businesses at the end of every fiscal quarter or 3 months. While these reports don't contain guest counts, they do show their income directly from entertainment. For a business like Don't Believe It's Butter, higher entertainment revenue generally indicates higher attendance. Looking at their quarterly reports from 2023 to 2024, their highest highest revenues are near both the December to January range as well as the March through May range. This lines up directly with what Dave & Buster's themselves stated in their annual report, that their busiest times are in spring and the year-end holidays, with the back-to-school season seeing the biggest dip. From there, we can get a very, very, very rough estimation of their attendance. In general, I found that the average person spends about $45 on a visit to Donkey and Bonky. We can divide that number by their quarterly revenue to give us a guest attendance number that probably isn't accurate at all, but it really doesn't have to be. In fact, I didn't actually need to calculate this number in the first place, since what we really need is the percent change in these numbers, or by how much the attendance differs from one quarter to another. These percent change values are what we'll be modeling our magic 25,000 number off of, so let's get modeling. To start, we're going to take Dave & Buster's peak quarter of the past 2 years and take our peak attendance of 25,000 per day and place it into that same slot. With Dave & Buster's measuring their quarters in 13-week increments, all we have to do is multiply that 25,000 guests per day by 13 weeks, and we get a total of 2,275,000 guests in that peak quarter. This is the part where I make a comparison to attendance numbers to another FEC or even Disney, but again, those numbers are notoriously hard to come by. But we can now use the percent changes in Dave & Buster's revenue as a model to follow, applying those same changes to our 2.2 million number here. And with that, we can finally use these numbers to get our estimated 2-year guest attendance, and here they are! Just over 8 million per year, putting this way ahead of Dave & Buster's, which only averages about 350,000 guests per store per year. Now you might be asking, why did I do this? Why estimate fluctuating attendance numbers quarter per quarter, not just give us one big number to work with? Well, to explain that, it's time to roll up our sleeves and head back into the breach. The security breach. Establishing just how much you'd have to pay for a visit to Freddy's Furry Wonderland is both incredibly straightforward and absolutely confusing. On the one hand, we have quite a long list of food and drink prices to work with. The only issue is the other hand is diseased and about to fall off, because the way I describe these prices are the same way you describe a man who just swallowed a grenade. All over the place. For example, some of these prices are downright ridiculous and not in the way you think. $4.25 for a burger, a scoop of triple fudge ice cream for $2. And remember, this place has a captive audience like a baseball stadium or a movie theater, and yet you could very easily eat for under $10 at a place like El Chips, or you could turn around and spend easily triple that at El Chips. Yeah, for all the well thought out design of the Pizzaplex, consistent food prices clearly weren't a priority. Of course, then you have menus that don't feature prices at all, like this one with such selections like burger dogs or I can't. I already made the pizza smoothie. I can't go through this again. But we do at least have prices we can work with. Okay. I hate the fact that I don't hate it. And since we already have a statistic for how many people actually eat at a family entertainment center, calculating the food and beverage revenues is going to be more or less straightforward. But before we do any fun math, we need to talk about the Pizzaplex's other sources of income. One is merchandising revenue to account for the several gift shops and other merch sold like Fazcams, but the biggest source of income, and the one that's going to take the longest to calculate, is the entertainment revenue. This is going to include money generated from core attractions like Roxy Raceway, Bonnie Bowl, or the arcades, and the cost of entry to the Pizzaplex itself. Now, the smart thing would be to save the entertainment revenue for the end of this section for audience retention purposes. But instead of that, how about we just jump right into the juicy bits and get started with the arcade revenue? To start, most of the machines in the Pizzaplex are the traditional arcade style, which with good foot traffic average about $342 per week per cabinet. And bing bong, this is why I needed to calculate the Pizzaplex's attendance quarter per quarter, because I just said if you have good foot traffic. Any arcade, and in fact any FEC in general, is going to make more money the more people are in it. So I can't just take the number of how much money does an arcade cabinet generate per day, multiply it by 365 and call it that. No, for me to get the most accurate numbers possible, I need to account for seasonal customer flow, which is exactly why I have this beautifully formatted chart right here. But even when taking this into account, it is highly unlikely that every machine is going to be seeing perfect turnover relative to the number of people in the Pizzaplex. Rather, it's the Superstar Arcade that's meant to be active throughout most of the day, considering it's free to enter and it has the prize counter. Bonnie Bowl then acts as spillover during the early hours, and the Fazcade is then meant to hold the teenager crowds later at night. So we need to calculate which arcades are active and when, which in turn means we need to calculate the MegaPizzaPlex's hours of operation. To start, we know that guest operations end at midnight, as we're presented with a "we are now closed" message around that time.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for visiting, and we hope you enjoyed the show.
Opening, on the other hand, is a bit more tricky, and by tricky I mean trivial, because I'm not afraid to call people over the phone. In the Pizzaplex, we know that doors unlock for employees at 6 a.m., and when calling down to the first Dave & Buster's that actually picked up the phone, I was told that employees typically arrive about 2 hours before opening. This means that the Pizzaplex likely begins guest operations at 8. This might seem too early at first, as Flank and Custard doesn't open until 10, but you forget, my precious prowling petunias, that this place has a daycare, which are typically open even earlier than that. But that's our final answer. Guest operations last between 8 a.m. to midnight, a benchmark we will be using extensively throughout our analysis. As discussed prior, the Superstar Arcade and Bonnie Bowl arcades will be active throughout the majority of the day, for a healthy 10 hours or so, whereas the Fazcade will be active for only roughly half that, while also cannibalizing a lot of the foot traffic in the Superstar Arcade. And by cannibalizing, I mean the business term, not William Afton's new fad diet. So with both Bonnie Bowl and the Superstar Arcade operating for a solid part of the day, we'll run their numbers at the full $342.50 per cabinet per week, with the Fazcade at roughly half that, which gives us a peak quarterly arcade revenue and our first revenue number of $2,038,676. That's a hefty chunk of change right there. Moving on to the core attractions, we can't talk about them just yet because just like in game, we're finding ourselves being gate-kept by the party passes. These are key items which are required to enter all of the core attractions save for Bonnie Bowl and Mazer Size, as those two require their own separate passes to enter. Now, in game, you don't need a party pass to enter Roxy Raceway, but considering that as of Security Breach it's under construction and we literally break in, I'm willing to bet that a party pass is required to enter here as well. These party passes are actually pretty interesting from a business standpoint for several reasons. For one, party passes aren't for any specific attraction. Rather, they allow for a choice between Monty Golf, Fazbear Blast, or Roxy Raceway, and then permit access for at least the rest of the day. This tells me it's going to cost more than a typical Fast Pass, as it grants access to an entire wing of the building and not just a ride, but less than a season pass since it's only good for one day, and also accounting for the fact that guests need to pay for entry and extra rides, so I can very comfortably place these passes in the $30 range. Another interesting benefit of these passes, to the MegaPizzaPlex I mean, not the consumer, is that these passes can both track and limit the number of guests who enter each attraction. Remember, compared to the actual guest count, the throughput of the core attractions is rather low, so using these party passes as rate limiters can help prevent overcrowding and long wait times, while, of course, also squeezing some extra delicious revenue from customers, because why provide convenience when you can charge for it instead? Did you know that the Disney Fast Passes used to be free? One last assumption we're going to make about these passes, because this is just something that FECs and theme parks do in my experience,
My source is me.
is that each party pass will include a single game of whatever attraction that pass was used for. However, thanks to dialogue from Freddy, we do know that guests are still charged for equipment rental regardless.
You got an annual Bonnie Bowl Unlimited Pass. MegaPizzaPlex entry not included. Shoe and ball rental fees still apply.
So while using your party pass may get you a round of Monty Golf, you'll still need to pay to rent the putter and balls. And to put a final blanket statement over all the core attractions, we need to remember that these are all placed within a larger entertainment complex, meaning the average person won't be spending all day in just one of these rides. Rather, they're more likely to spend at most a couple hours worth before wanting to move on to another attraction. So with that squared away, we'll pick up the pace to cover the core attractions, and what better way to do that than to start with Roxy Raceway. Now believe me, I would love to call down to the NASCAR Speed Park and ask, how many people pay for the Smoky Mountain Speedway track upgrade per day? But numbers like this, again, are typically not made public, so unfortunately, this is where I just have to use my best judgment again.
I'm my source.
Comparing this track to similar experiences, and considering the pay for entry, each additional ride would cost about $10 after the first. And while the numbers I found weren't the most conclusive, the best estimate I could get is that the average person will get in about 2.5 races in a non-go-kart centric park, which brings our calculations to a grand total of $1,926,288 per quarter. That might sound like a lot for a single go-kart track in a day, but per this math here, this ride is generating about $250 every 10 minutes at peak operations. Moving on to Roxy's Salon. By the way, did you know that some salon visits can take 6 hours? We'll price this place as a low-end salon, charging $50, as this is mostly to catch the overflow of guests who didn't want to go go-karting, such as younger children who might be a bit too intimidated. Counting the number of chairs and accounting for the salon's overall size, this puts their quarterly profit at $436,800. And there's not much more to say here, let's move on. Heading down to Louisiana. We already know that the golf course has a capacity of 72 guests per hour. The vast majority of people only play one round of mini golf, which is likely true here considering that it takes about an hour for 18 holes. From there, a round of mini golf costs typically $10 to $15 per person depending on course complexity. However, the party pass does give you a free round, so really all we need to do is calculate the club and ball rental, which I can't find any statistics for because what fucking mini golf course charges you extra for the putter and balls?
My source is there's no source.
But for the party pass to have any real perceived value, the rental cost of the putter and balls should be less than the price of a single round. So, I don't know, $8 for the rental, I guess? Figuring that Monty Golf gets 12 hours of good throughput, we can get a quarterly income of $2,987,712 per quarter. Continuing on down to Bonnie Bowl, things are quite a bit different here since we don't use party passes to get in. Instead, Gregory, remember Gregory, steals a yearly pass to Bonnie Bowl in order to enter. However, the only thing this implies to me is that the pass to Bonnie Bowl costs a different amount than the party passes, and I believe it's less. Remember, not only is the Bonnie Bowl area more family-oriented, but it also has a small arcade as well as a cute diner that reminds me of Johnny Rockets before they chose to solely exist at airports and cruise ships. This means that Bonnie Bowl has the most varied spending opportunities out of any of the core attractions, and thus can afford to have a lower price of entry, most likely the cost of a round of bowling. If we look up bowling prices at an FEC like round 1, they charge roughly $30 per hour per lane. And considering the lower costs as discussed prior, the MegaPizzaPlex might charge roughly $20 for a round of bowling. From there, shoe rental is priced at $4.50 per person, and bowling ball rental doesn't exist.
No source.
I have literally never heard of, nor can I find any examples of bowling alleys charging you for the balls. But Freddy explicitly states,
Haha, pay up, bitch.
in terms of bowling ball rental, so, $5? No, $5.50. Just so I can round up the rental fees to an even 10. Fuck it.
My source is I make it fucked up.
As a final note, I highly doubt that many people will be bringing their own balls and shoes because even with the yearly bowling pass, Freddy also explicitly stated,
Still gotta pay to enter the Pizzaplex, dick nips.
so I won't be accounting for annual passes or people who bring their own equipment. They probably just go to an actual bowling alley. So accounting for all of this data, this gives us a quarterly Bonnie Bowl total of $720,000 per quarter. Moving on to Phaser Blast, which I apparently refuse to pronounce consistently. This area has by far the least going on in terms of separate offerings like Roxy Salon or Bonnie Bowl's Arcade. Another FEC, main event, also has a 2-story laser tag arena and they charge about $8 per person. I also have an incredible laser tag story for that location, but this video is already running long, so maybe I'll save that for my Let's Play channel or something. Once again, going up tomorrow, don't forget, subscribe now so you don't miss it! Due to Phaser Blast briefing one group while another is already playing, it's not possible for one person to play 2 games back to back. Plus, since the Party Pass gives access throughout the day, multiple visits across a guest stay are likely and will be entirely dependent on how long is spent in the Pizzaplex. Considering these games are short and the relatively cheap cost of $8, we can guess that the average person will get in at least 2 extra games. Remember, the people playing laser tag here are the ones who enjoyed it enough to not only pay for the game, but to pay for the entry fee to get to laser tag. So if anything, this 2 extra visits is on the conservative side. But this gives us a final quarterly income of $781,386.66 per quarter. Next are the 3 minor attractions that all require a separate pass. Major Size, entrance to the Fazcade and dance floor, and the backstage VIP passes to Rockstar Row. For Major Size, we know they have a total of 8 balance boards for guests. The entire aesthetic here, including Chica herself, are clearly designed after those old 80s workout videos that I felt really weird searching on YouTube for some reason. They last about 40 minutes or so, and since food is served as well, let's put each session at about an hour. This hour will also last for the maze as well, since this likely acts as overflow for smaller children. I have no clue how many kids the maze will fit, so I'm going to say it's 8 to match the number of balance boards, 1 kid per participant. Now, I have no doubt that they'd be willing to cram more kids in there. I mean, cramming kids into dangerous places is literally what FNAF is founded on. And yes, I'm aware I've been making a lot of dead kid jokes in this video, but let me remind you that Five Nights at Freddy's is literally built on child murder. Assuming that the pizza is provided, as I see no menus in this area, we'll place this at the same $20 price point as Bonnie Bowl. The experience has less variety, of course, but the added food adds quite a lot to the value. So, using similar calculations as before, we get a major size income of $349,440 per quarter. To price the entrance into the Fazcade, we can look at cover charges at various teen nightclubs, which the Fazcade definitely styles itself after. These nightclubs typically charge between $8 to $20 for a cover charge. We'll place ours at $15 as we need to consider that there are other revenue sources in the Fazcade. And while the Fazcade likely sees visitors throughout the entire day, it's going to be far more concentrated between certain hours. So for that, we'll place this at the same 5-hour metric as we did when calculating the arcade revenue. As for attendance, the Fazcade has a seating capacity capacity of about 135. And using the Dimmadome and Blubber Nugget statistic of only 48% of people actually ordering food, that's about 281 expected people in the arcade at once. Granted, I am aware that there are no menus in this area, but considering these VIP lounges and nightclubs in general, I would be just a tad surprised if this place didn't serve food. Next, according to various sources, and by that I mean forum posts because this statistic apparently isn't well documented, the average person spends about 3.5 hours in a nightclub per visit. With the peak operating time of the Fastcade only at about 5 hours, that brings us a quarterly income of $547,979.25, and that's before accounting for food and drink, not to mention how this is a driver of the previously calculated arcade revenue. Now, the Rockstar Row backstage passes are going to be tricky, as I have literally nothing to go on. I don't know how often the animatronics are available, I don't know how many people are allowed to visit an animatronic at once, I don't have any idea how much it costs to go backstage to visit an animatronic because that's just not a thing that exists in our lame-ass world, but I know it's something people pay for because of these processors that exist right outside the guest entrance to Rockstar Row, so fuck it. Back to Dave & Buster's we go! The closest thing I could find was the Next Level packet, which is priced at $35 per kid. Next, the average number of guests at a child's birthday party in recent years is about 16, unless you're Cassie, who canonically has no friends other than Greg the serial killer. I called like 4 different dunce and blusters and asked about how many birthday party wristband things they give up per week, and one of them said, I don't know, about a dozen I guess, which is as good as I'm gonna get, so here's the number, let's move on. Superstar Daycare thankfully gives me a brief respite from bullshit land because daycares have specific state-regulated laws as far as capacity. The Utah Office of Administration regulates maximum daycare attendance based on the number of caregivers. We can assume that Fazbear Inc. is going to be cheeky and count the daycare attendant as 2 separate employees, one for Son and one for the reason he has so many dedicated fanfics. Yes, I know I made a similar joke in my previous video, bite me. Now, the daycare seems to have multiple areas for different ages, such as these soft play areas for smaller children and the play place for older children. Unfortunately, this makes things incredibly complicated because look at all this crap! For a mixed age group of children, not including any infant and toddler, the provider shall ensure that the caregiver to child ratio is determined by the age of the oldest child present in the group minus 1 child of that age group. Yeah, no, I'm gonna say the exact same thing that Fazbear management said when they read those regulations. If an inspector actually bothers to show up, stall him and we'll sort it out on the way. I mean, Fazbear Entertainment does have a pretty good track record of hiding children from authorities. Dead kid joke number 4, everybody! Because we have 2 attendants, we can reach the maximum group size of 40. Now, this isn't 40 per hour. Rather, the throughput is going to depend on how long each guest is going to spend in the MegaPizzaPlex before they come back to pick up their kid. From what I could find, the average stay at an FEC is about 2.5 hours. Now, I would greatly expect this number to be longer for the MegaPizzaPlex due to its sheer size and list of activities, but 1, I'm a bit biased, and 2, I'd rather not rely on gut instinct when I have actual numbers to work with. I will, however, round this up to an even 3 hours simply due to the sheer size of the MegaPizzaPlex. I mean, you're gonna be doing a lot more walking in here than you would a Chuck E. Cheese. We're going to put the daycare's operating hours at 13 hours total, as you're not gonna drop your kid off at a daycare 30 minutes before the Pizzaplex closes. So, using daily rates I found, we get a total quarterly income of $683,458.53 per quarter. Childcare's expensive, man. That's why I have queso and churro. And finally, this brings us around to arguably the strangest revenue generator, entry into the atrium itself. Thankfully, we already have a quarterly attendance number for this, so the only thing I need to do is figure out the price. What's interesting here is that entering the lobby is free, but to enter the atrium, which gives access to most attractions, you need to get an upgrade to your pass at the upgrade kiosk, and this is where things get complicated. From what I could find, FECs that use the pay-to-play model don't charge for entry. In fact, most everything ever either does one or the other, charge for entry or charge for the ride. So I literally have no data or precedent to go off of here, and I really hate to leave such a crucial number to just what I think they'd charge, but I don't really have another option. Now I know how Any Austin feels when surveying a Pokemon game. But, using my best judgment, I would expect the price for entry to be far less than a typical theme park pass, considering you also have to pay for the rides inside the Pizzaplex. Since entry to a theme park like Six Flags is about $40, we'll charge a fourth of that for an even 10. So let me just crunch the numbers here real quick, and $22,750,000 per quarter. This is more than double the revenue of all the other entertainment experiences combined. That's why this whole double charging thing seems ridiculous. But then again, the whole FNAF universe just seems to be even more corporate dystopian than our current reality. So I guess the citizens of the FNAF-verse are just used to it by now. You know what? The entire Five Nights at Freddy's lore would fit right into World of Darkness. But hey, that's all entertainment revenue wrapped up. So what's our final count? Our peak quarterly entertainment income is a staggering $32,156,699.59. That's a lot of money. And since I had the foresight to go ahead and put formulas all up in this bitch, bam! We have all our quarterly projections based on changes in attendance, and this is what I needed that percent change for. We cannot just assume this 32 million value for every single quarter. We need to account for seasonal changes in attendance, which is why we use the Dave & Buster's seasonal revenue as a model. But we're not quite done serving this financial pie chart, because food and beverages are next. Thankfully, this is an exceedingly simple calculation since, once again, we can use the Dave & Buster's quarterly report as a model. Now, despite the incredibly cheap prices of food at the MegaPizzaPlex, mostly, I would expect their profit margin to be similar to a Dave & Buster's due to how Fazbear Inc. uses comically cheap ingredients. We even have a lore message referencing the whole reconstructed Chuck E. Cheese pizza thing. I really do wonder what the hell that was all about. I also feel comfortable scaling the food and beverage revenues between the MegaPizzaPlex and Dick'n Balls. Surprised it took me this long to get to that one, because of just how amazingly well everything else is scaled between the two companies. So what we can do here is create a food and beverage scale, which shows what percent of Dave & Buster's revenue came from food and drink compared to entertainment, and apply that same scale to the MegaPizzaPlex's entertainment value, and ta-da! Food and beverage revenues done. And this finally leads us to the final number we need to calculate total revenues. And by Chica's juicy chicken thighs, am I ready to move on? I'm serious, this entire section has taken me a week of research, writing, and calculating, but I'm not done yet. Once again, the MegaPizzaPlex is in a weird spot. Yes, it's time to talk about the reason half the shows we loved in the 80s and 90s even existed: merchandising. Merchandising like, hey, what's that? Yeah, I'm sorry for the second plug, but it's either this or a sponsored ad. Yep, I've got t-shirts now, and what's great about these shirts is that they're not coming from some big company, but from someone I know, as in real life. I could drive to her house and visit her dog. We've worked together to make some great shirts with some of my most iconic quotes on them. A link to her Etsy page is in the description. Go take a look. Put my face on your chest. Okay, I'm done hawking merch, so let's get back to talking about merch. Unfortunately, every source I could find rolled in their merchandise revenues with food upcharges and other sales. But unfortunately, due to how we've been cutting up revenue streams, we can make another direct comparison. This is why detailed bookkeeping is so important. The United Parks and Resorts quarterly report separates our park revenue into the two categories: admission, food, merchandise, and other, with other being various extra charges at other parks. And thanks to my immaculate bookkeeping, we can also separate all of our revenues into admission, food, merchandise, and other, which covers our entertainment revenue. From what I could find, which admittedly wasn't much, the average merchandise spending is about $4.30 per guest. This accounts for the fact that not every guest is going to be buying merchandise, because when was the last time you saw any kind of merch for sale at a theme park for under $10? That isn't like a pen or something, maybe some candy. But that gives us the following peak quarterly merchandise revenue of $9.8 million. And you know something absolutely beautiful? This same UP&R report confirms my numbers are correct. Comparing their primary revenue of admission to their secondary revenues of food, merch, and other revenues, we get a scale of about 55 to 44%. Using a similar ratio by comparing the MegaPizzaPlex's main revenues to their secondary revenues, we get, wha-bam! 54 to 45%. Look at how similar those numbers are. Does it mean anything? Probably not, but damn is it nice when numbers line up like this. Woohoo! And even better, we finally have the total quarterly revenue from in-store operations. To compare, we can roughly calculate the average Dunkin' Donuts quarterly income is roughly $3 million per store. The MegaPizzaPlex, by contrast, on average, for a peak quarter, takes in $53,530,000 per quarter.
Holy fuck.
Now, I know what you're thinking. With these people making $215 million per year, surely this place is profitable, right? Well, to quote the now incredibly controversial figure, Bob Tomato, you'd think so, wouldn't ya? So now that we've covered Freddy's bulbous assets, let's talk about his, flaccid liabilities. Some of these are going to be extremely simple, as a lot of these I can scale directly to Dave & Buster's again. But to cover expenses, we need to finalize a few more things under physical assets. For everything under entertainment and building fixtures, I'm just going to give you the values right now because A, they don't really matter for the income statement and are more necessary for my own research and comparisons, and B, this really just boiled down to me researching average construction or purchasing costs of stuff like kitchen equipment or laser tag sets. Also, a lot of this stuff already has rule of thumb ratios, like with the food and drink costs, or they had specific examples I could compare directly to rides in the real world, like mini golf and go-karts. I will mention that I included both the recharge stations and the Freddy Dome into these calculations, which I based off of electric car chargers and various manufacturing robots. And one final note, if you're wondering why other rides is so much more expensive than everything else, it's because that's where I put the Gator Golf gondola ride, as dark rides are apparently super expensive to build these days for some reason. What's actually important here is figuring out the maintenance costs for all these attractions. But once again, it isn't all that interesting since it's just me researching more boring real world stuff. That being said, I will take this moment to say fuck mazer size. Construction costs were a little annoying, but surprise surprise, there exists very little documentation on the operating costs of a moving modular maze, so in the end I slapped 10k on there for the servos and repair costs. I also had quite the difficult time finding estimates for dark ride maintenance costs because this is also something a lot of theme parks keep close to their chests for some stupid reason. And while Google AI said it was between 5 to 20% of its revenue, I couldn't actually find that number in any of the articles it linked me, so let that be yet another reason to not trust Google AI.
I just do not trust you.
But looking at various listings, a low-tech gondola car runs at about 75k per car. We know that the MegaPizzaPlex repairs these things in-house because we go through a dedicated repair bay in Ruin, and if via maintenance they end up effectively replacing or ship of Theseusing 3 of these gondolas per year, and while also accounting for the other rides here, like this Ferris wheel and these teacups, we land on entertainment maintenance of about 1.5 million per year, and that's just the rides and arcade cabinets. We still need to figure out all the mundane maintenance, which again isn't super interesting because these are all very easy to research and have general rules of thumb. For example, basic building maintenance is often measured in maintenance per square foot, at about $2.5 per in commercial spaces. Usually I would place this higher because of how much more chaotic Freddy's Fun Palace is compared to my office building, but a lot of this maintenance is either performed by underpaid technicians or literal robots, so I'm keeping that 2.5 figure, and after factoring everything else in the boring category, we get a yearly cost of 5.2 million. This leaves us with just one more expense: how much the Pizzaplex is spending on whatever the hell not meat is from the PizzaBot minigame. Thankfully, we already have an industry standard of food should cost 30% of food sales. And binga banga bonga baby, we have a food expense of, holy shit, nearly 19 million. Now, if you're wondering why making a burger is more expensive than maintaining a mini golf course, profit margins for restaurants historically are extremely slim. But with that, our yearly expense is thus far $25,497,047. Quite the big spenders, but you might be saying, geez, you magnanimous math magi, this is already solved. Surely this place is profitable. Well, my toddling tadpoles, I wouldn't bet your beignets just yet, because we still need to talk about the most iconic and potentially expensive feature of Five Nights at Freddy's. That feature, of course, is the animatronics themselves. Mork, help me, this is gonna hurt. Okay, I'm just gonna say it. Figuring out the dollar value and yearly cost of the animatronics could legitimately be its own video. I mean, these things are so beyond anything we have today that this is going to involve a lot of speculation and throwing up my hands with a... But I'm gonna give it the good old postgraduate college try. The closest analog we have to the FNAF animatronics is the Atlas, and while yes, it's an impressive piece of hardware, it's nowhere near the fluidity of what this child's entertainment company was able to produce. I mean, let's be honest, for as cool as Atlas is, it looks like it's always about 3 seconds away from shitting its pants. Oh god, oh no, oh shit, oh fuck, oh god. I mean, the FNAF animatronics move not only with 100% human fluidity, but are dexterous enough to drive a go-kart and play the guitar. Oh, and there's also the small fact that, almost not worth mentioning really, that these robots are completely sentient. Despite tech bros calling what we have today artificial intelligence, it's not. Real AI is still far beyond anything we're capable of right now, to say nothing of the software and hardware required to make these glam rocks move so fluidly. But before I go too far off the rails, let's start with the more grounded parts of the animatronics. A very helpful article I found states that the Atlas units will cost about $130,000 each by 2030, which is the same decade that the Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach game takes place. The Endos overall have very similar capabilities to the Atlas, if still slightly more advanced due to their fluid movements as witnessed in Ruin, and the fact that they're able to know when someone is looking at them even when facing away from that person somehow. However, there are two clear disadvantages of these things. For one, their exposed frames introduce a lot more pinch points and opportunities for loose objects objects to get caught, and 2, they freaky as hell. I mean, can you imagine the reaction of some factory employee who's been working a 12-hour shift, he's getting ready to go home and get maybe 5 hours of sleep, and then he turns the corner and sees one of these things staring in his face? Either that guy is having a heart attack or that robot is getting punched in the mouth. But either way, the company isn't going to honor workers' comp. So with the offsets of these flaws, and again considering these are being built in-house, I'm keeping the price at that same $130,000 mark. Now let's stop talking about all this theory and get back to what you all came here for. Talking about numbers! With 28 endos in parts and service, 11 below daycare theater, and I'm not sure how many in Bonnie Bowl. Seriously, these things are really weird here. They show up in different numbers or sometimes just not at all, but I think there are like 6 on average. That gives us a total of 45 endos at $130,000 each for a grand total of 5.8 million total in asset value. Now, some of you might be asking about the endos in the not really Afton pit, but I'm not counting those or in fact anything down there since I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be a secret. Like if the MegaPizzaPlex isn't even telling their contractors that there's a hole down there, then I'm pretty sure they're not going to be reporting their child murder dungeon to the government. Next, we have to evaluate the price of the 5 Glamrock shells, and to quickly sum that up, I guess to start, we need to figure out their material. Looking at the Ruin models, there is significant cracking damage and nothing warped or bent, which suggests to me a more rigid base like ceramic instead of metal. Ceramic also might make more sense here due to the ridiculous amount of heat that would be generated by the animatronics batteries that are powering, you know, actual AI. Making this assumption would help me out, but for some arcane reason only known to wizards and magi, I couldn't find anything for approximate cost of a ceramic endoskeleton, so the best I could do is plates of ceramic body armor, which go for about $225 for a 10 by 12 inch plate. Next, using heights found by XBGamer_20 on Reddit. Damn, is that an Xbox 360 gamer tag if I ever saw one. The main 4 animatronics clock in at about 7 feet tall each, and thus remains intact my appreciation for big women. Now I'm certain there are some super fancy and complex calculations to perfectly measure the exact number of square centimeters needed to create each of these 5 shells, but I have no idea where to even begin, nor do I have the money to hire someone who would, so I'm just gonna use some basic baby math to get 10k per shell and wash my hands of it. Now, of course, the other valuable part of these animatronics is their programming, and to evaluate the cost of an entirely locally housed sapient AI that does have network connectivity but doesn't seem to depend on an internet connection, I refer you to my previous statement. Except actually no, because after stepping back from my computer and pausing my stream of Bad Ow, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask Part 1 by Snapcube 2, I realized that I was being a massive idiot because the value of their software literally does not matter. Despite the comedic incompetence of Fazbear Inc., and in fact every antagonistic horror company, just once could we get a horror company run by someone like Hank Scorpio? I am murderously certain that they'd have the basic foresight to have more than one copy of each animatronic software. And since Fazbear Inc. owns the software they created, losing an individual instance of that software doesn't lose them any money. So thankfully, we don't actually need to factor in their software when calculating their value. But before we move on to the daycare attendant and DJ Music Man, there's something rather odd about how the animatronics are presented to us. The main 5 animatronics come in 2 main components, an endoskeleton and a shell. The odd thing about this is that we see plenty of endoskeletons throughout the game, but we only ever see 1 shell for each animatronic. Further confirming this suspicion is Vanessa's dialogue.
Monty will run the shows until parts and service can slap your casing on a new endo.
And the fact that they had no backup shells to replace Glamrock Bonnie once he got gator golfed. But why would they carry only 1 shell per performer? The shell is just a decorative casing, designed to be slapped on an endo and take it from scary to sexy, and doesn't contain any of the expensive structural components. So I ask you again, why would they have so many endos if they only have 1 shell per each character? Well, this is where I temporarily venture away from classic game theory and brave the wilds of modern game theory. No, I'm not going to be asking if Glamrock Bonnie was killed by Robbie Rotten, though I would play the shit out of that crossover. I think I have an actual answer as to this really weird conundrum. Starting with the endos themselves, none of them have any real personality. Then we have the line from Vanessa. She never explicitly mentions reprogramming, though that absolutely could be part of the process and is just implied, but I think there's evidence for reprogramming not being necessary when transferring 1 shell to another endo. In Ruin, Cassie dons a mask that not only has a substantial amount of software baked into it, but is able to inject programs directly into her brain because Fazbear Incorporated has started employing literal wizards. From there, it wouldn't be a stretch to say the animatronic shells can do something similar. What I think is, the shells contain the programming and personalities of the animatronics complex and the endos only contain the basic structure and movement software. When a shell is clamped onto an endo, that endo is then injected with the pre-programmed personality of the corresponding character. This could explain for the lack of duplicates for a number of reasons. For one, software that contains an actual sentient program is so revolutionary that it alone is the basis for like half of science fiction, but more importantly, it's a trade secret. So I would think they'd want to keep a tight lock on these things by having as few instances of this software as necessary. Sounds great, but we still haven't looked as to the reason for the high number of endos compared to shells. Well, for that, it's time for a quick lesson on how businesses can get out of paying taxes. Line item 15 on our income statement sheet, accumulated depreciation. By the way, if anyone out there wants to trick their teacher into showing this video during class, this is the part to show them. Depreciation, in simple terms, is the concept that certain objects decrease in value throughout their useful lifespan. As such, this line item actually subtracts from the total value of your plant, property, and equipment, or PPE. The example for accumulated depreciation that's found in every single business textbook is a company truck. But I want to keep things interesting, so I'm going to use the example of the go-karts from Roxy Raceway. Its value is going to go down the older it is and the more miles it has on it. So let's say we buy one of these go-karts for about $5,000. At the end of the year, we expect it to be only worth $4,000 due to wear and tear. That difference of $1,000 is the depreciation value. So while it does make sense that a company can take depreciation into account when calculating their assets, what doesn't make sense is a specific method of calculating depreciation called the LIFO system. If you've ever worked in the food industry, you probably know about the FIFO system, first in, first out. Fun fact, you do this exact same thing at your house without even realizing it. If you have just a few slices of Faz bread left in your pantry and you buy a new loaf when you go grocery shopping, you're naturally going to finish off that almost empty bag first because it's the one closer to going bad. That is the FIFO system and is opposite to the LIFO system, which is last in, first out. In this scenario, after buying that new bag of Faz bread, you would immediately open that new bag and leave the old bag where it was. And in fact, that old bag could continue rotting in your inventory so long as you keep buying new bags. The advantage to this system is that it decreases your average asset value, as using the LIFO system in this way will leave you with a pantry full of half-eaten rotten loaves of bread. Of course, that's also the disadvantage of the LIFO system, as all your product will now be old and rotten and thus a lot harder to sell. Because of that, there are very few goods you would actually want to store and sell this way. But the fucked up part about this system, oops, sorry about the swear word, high school teacher who got tricked into showing this to your class. I'm sure your students have never heard or said that word before now. Well, if you're upset with me, you can let me know by pressing the button that says subscribe, as well as the icon that looks like a thumbs up. But the fudged up part about the LIFO system is that a business doesn't actually have to use the LIFO system in order to use the LIFO system. In other words, if I'm the owner of Big Boy Bread and Buns Co., I can absolutely report on my financial statements that I have a warehouse full of year-old bread and have consistently been shipping out all the newly baked bread, even if I'm not actually doing that. And do you know what I see when I look at the ridiculous amount of endoskeletons just hanging out in the basement? A big fat opportunity for the LIFO system, baby! Yes, that is exactly what Fazbear Inc. is doing with its excessive number of endos. By legally lying to the government and pretending that these endos are worth less than they actually are, they can lower the value of their inventories and thus their taxable income. However, there's one problem with this. To use the LIFO system, products actually have to be going in and out on a relatively consistent basis. So while we know that Fazbear Inc. can create these endos on a whim, what we don't know is how this inventory is leaving. That, however, is a mystery more relevant for a later part of this video, so I'm just gonna leave this question lurking in the back of your mind while I talk about more math stuff. Fortunately for me, calculating depreciation is actually pretty easy. So if we assume that the Pizzaplex is reporting the endos age at an average of 4 years, no doubt artificially inflated by the LIFO system, their accumulated depreciation after 4 years is $45,715 each. Multiply that by 45, and that's a total of just over $2 million of depreciation, or $2 million they can deduct from their total assets, thus reducing their taxes. Granted, not by that much in the grand scheme of things, and I was really hoping it would be more, but in truth this was mostly just an excuse for me to rant about how absolutely stupid the LIFO system is. Now, I could go on to calculate things like the depreciation of the handful of go-karts, or, I don't know, the truck Gregory uses to escape in that one ending, but those are going to be so ridiculously paltry compared to the animatronics that I'm really just not going to bother. So So moving on, we need to cover the staff bots, which you may have noticed I haven't talked about yet, mostly because I'm pretty sure the number of staff bots I counted isn't going to be the most accurate. The obvious difficulty came from the fact that they are constantly moving around and look completely identical, but the real difficulty came from the fact that I think I was slowly going insane? I don't think this is a feature of the game, but I swear the number of staff bots fluctuated depending on the hour or game state or how the room loaded depending on how I flew into it. And this mostly happened in the atrium, which is a problem since that's also where most of the staff bots are, so I felt like this game was literally trying to gaslight me. Ooh, was there a bot here this time? I don't know. Then of course we have the issue of phaser blast, since the number of staff bots here is literally infinite if you keep playing long enough, and infinity isn't a number that's generally compatible with Excel calculations. So without accounting for the infinite exploding staff bots, I got a final count of approximately 136 total bots. With phaser blast, I'm going to add 11 more, with the logic that the enemy bots are made to fill in any missing player slots. So if just one person plays, 11 bots will join to make a full 6v6, so that's 147 in total. And modern estimates for similar robots go for about $15,000 a pop. That gives us a total asset value of 2.2 million and a total depreciation of just over 1 million. This leaves us only 2 more bots to puzzle out, the daycare attendant and
the giant enemy spider.
Also, I'm not counting the mini music men because I'm pretty sure they're not on the books. They only show up in the vents, they already look neglected and broken, and the only log entries that mention them are employees going, why do I keep hearing things in these suspiciously child-sized vents? Starting with Daddy Daycare, he is by far the most agile of the animatronics, even able to fly while suspended by cables. He also doesn't seem to follow the endo shell setup, wearing actual clothes and having a custom-made head. This means I don't really have anything to go off of here, so I'm just going to slap a 25% increase in value from the endos for its increased complexity and call it a day. I mean, really, what else can I do? I already used the most advanced humanoid robot you can buy as a base for the glam rocks. I can't base the daycare attendant on an even more advanced robot that doesn't exist. As for DJ Music Man, okay, let's get this started. I wanted to use an animatronic of similar size, but those are understandably rare, but a very famous example is the Yeti from Expedition Everest. While it was easy to get a price for the construction of the entire ride, I couldn't do the same for the cost of the animatronic. So I turned to another massive animatronic being built, one of King Kong, but the cost of that one is also being kept under wraps. All of this rambling is to say that in terms of pricing DJ Music Man, I have no fucking clue. There is nothing on the market that's even close to this spindly beast. So the best I can do is find another massive self-propelled machine to compare him to, and for that I'm going to use one of those giant dump trucks I really want to drive and or watch get hit by a freight train. These run at about $5 million a pop, and our depreciation is 3.6 million, so there. That's Music Man's value. Hell, if anything, that's kind of a steal for a giant metal spider that can crawl on walls and eat children. But we have one final stop before I pass righteous judgment on the MegaPizzaPlex. We still need the remaining liabilities, including payroll, animatronic upkeep, and the main reason for rising healthcare costs in America, general and admin expenses. Starting with employee wages, I actually have a pretty good way of calculating the total number of fleshy, floppy people staffing the Pizzaplex. If you recall, I counted all client-facing terminals that can be occupied by a staff member, and interestingly, this number is only 23 less than the total number of staff bots, not counting the bots in Phaser Blast, which just blow up anyway, and I just figured out why they do that. The reason the MegaPizzaPlex sets these staff bots to explode when hit by a laser pointer, which is a strange thing to design in the first place, but whatever, is inventory control. Using the aforementioned LIFO system requires that products actually, come in and out at some point. So by having staff bots constantly blowing up, they have a reason to create more staff bots more rapidly. In other words, getting rid of the newer bots faster and thus increasing the average age of their bots and thus their depreciation. But back on track, they have at least enough staff bots to work every single register with a handful of bots left over. And browsing through the various lore dump messages, the only confirmed jobs still worked by humans I could find were kitchen staff, a guy named Dave who probably got fired, rip Dave, Vanessa, another security guard or two who probably aren't Vanessa, animatronic technicians, attraction technicians, and arcade technicians, one of whom went crazy trying to beat Princess Quest, at least one hiring manager, someone that hiring manager was reporting to, various management staff, and at least one person in the customer service department logging all the various complaints. If you're wondering about Fazbear's fleet of lawyers, those typically won't be employed by the store itself, but rather Fazbear Incorporated. And as a final note, I don't think I need to explain that the mimic who was for some reason LARPing as William Afton won't be on the payroll. Jobs like kitchen staff and security guard guards had more or less straightforward guidelines that were pretty easy to follow, though I generally bump those numbers down due to the typical horror company that overworks its employees trope we see in literally every horror game starring an evil corporation. For kitchen staff, the rule of thumb is 4 cooks per 50 tables, and by taking that 2,200 seating capacity and saying every 4 seats is a table, we get 44 cooks per shift. And since we eventually find a memo stating that all night shift jobs were eliminated entirely, we likely only have 2 shifts, lunch and dinner. However, we directly witness staff bots working in the kitchen, meaning the Pizzaplex can hire fewer human cooks. In total, I'm reducing the number of human employees to 22, essentially having 1 human cook per that 50 tables metric. But I don't think the MegaPizzaPlex is replacing all 66 of those cooks with 66 staff bots. Instead, keeping in line with the theme of employee abuse, I'd imagine they would have just 1 bot per human cook. And you know what else? I am once again backed up by my stunning powers of coincidence, because if we use this 1-to-1 assumption, where each human cook has 1 staff bot working alongside them, that leaves us 136 total staff bots minus 22 kitchen bots for a total of 114 bots remaining. And hey gee, why does that number sound familiar? Oh, that's right, the Pizzaplex has 113 customer processors, literally 1 number off from the number of staff bots. Coincidence? I think yes. Wages, meanwhile, are as simple as going on to Indeed and just looking up the average kitchen staff pay in Hurricane, Utah, and then calculating likely hours. But for that, we need to determine exactly when humans are actually working in the Pizzaplex. Considering that in-game, no humans were showing up during Gregory's 6 a.m. escape, we might be able to assume that humans only arrive at 7 a.m., leaving the first hour of opening to the staff bots. After that, they might leave around 8 p.m. for when the staff bots take over night shift. This might seem a bit early to be considered night shift, but for restaurants that close at midnight, 8 p.m. is typically considered the start of night shift. That leaves us a total of 13 hours of human operations, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Coming back to the kitchen staff, it's pretty darn certain Fazbear Inc. would want to avoid paying benefits wherever they could avoid it.
You can't fool me though, you're just trying to snag one of those $25 gift certificates at the end of the year for outstanding performance.
No, I'm doing it because you guys keep threatening to dock my pay and repo my truck.
And according to Utah state law, an employee qualifies for full benefits if they're scheduled to work for a week of 30 hours or more. Thus, I would put first shift from 10:30 to 12:30 and evening shift from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock, with staff bots filling the gaps in between. That brings us to $74.63 per employee per day, and a grand total of $599,000 per year at no benefit cost. And this is more or less the same pattern I took for all the other staff members, researching expected numbers for staffing levels and then taking into account Fazbear Inc.'s penchant for employee abuse. I mean, their ethics ain't great. They are literally an evil corporation that murders children, so just below Nestle in terms of human exploitation. So for some very brief explanations, the minimum number of security guards recommended for a large shopping mall is 5, and by giving 3 security guards a full 40 hours, one of whom is Vanessa, we can get decently even coverage while accounting for peak days, letting staff bots make up any gaps in between. For arcade techs, most daily maintenance is pretty simple, like cleaning or dusting, which can be easily performed by staff bots. It's only the more complicated maintenance that would be needed to be done weekly or monthly by actual humans. Knowing that, I placed 1 tech per arcade per shift, leaving just 6 techs total to maintain the 700 or so arcade cabinets. Hey, technically in FNAF 1, could the possessed animatronics be considered child labor? As far as attraction techs, most of the Pizzaplex's attractions are fairly low maintenance, like Minigolf or Chica's Fitness Room, or have easily replaceable parts like Phaser Blast. Really, the only reason this number isn't lower is due to the complex maintenance of go-karts in general, as 1 tech per shift could very easily cover the lower maintenance attractions. The only remaining role of any interest are the animatronic techs, and you might be surprised to find that there are only 2. Well, that's because, in general, the animatronic maintenance is rather lacking. In-game, we see multiple instances of staff bots in disrepair or being thrown out, others that have been taken for some kind of personal use, and the damage to Glamrock Bonnie is so severe that he was considered a total loss. This is another way the crazy high number of endos can really shine. Why bother repairing an endo when you can just toss it out and slap on a new shell and ta-da! I told you it'd be back! Rather than trying to repair the endos, which would require specialized technicians and spare parts, they're just scrapping them the moment they become too damaged and not attempting repairs at all. It's like a John Deere wet dream up in here. Reinforcing this theory is how the Freddy domes seem to be concerned only with fitting new shells onto endos and is so simple that a literal child can do it. Now, in terms of cosmetic damage, the Glamrocks seem perfectly capable of performing it themselves, as they're given makeup, polish, and other implements of construction in their green rooms. So the technicians maintaining the animatronics are likely not only underqualified, but also not super necessary. Too much damage on an endo? Throw it out and use the Child Chopper 3000 to put the shell on a new one. Now, since we find emails that are clearly communicating between animatronic techs, there's at least more than one, so I went with 2. As far as their base wages, I place them at the same pay as an attraction tech, which honestly might be a bit too much, considering, once again, a literal child was able to do their job without much difficulty. Oh, and we have exactly 1 customer service rep because there is absolutely no way that Fazbear Inc. takes its complaints seriously. I mean, what better way to reduce the number of complaints than just not listening to them? From there, benefits are pretty easy to calculate. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that benefits typically cost $13.30 per hour worked. So in total, that brings our general payroll costs to $1,938,957.07. Moving on to general and admin, this one is a pretty boring category that has nothing to do with robots built to murder children, so I'm really just gonna gloss over this one. I will note that this category has already been partially calculated with the building and appliance maintenance, so this is just going to cover management wages, which is extremely easy to look up on Indeed, meaning I was spared a call down to my local Dave & Buster's.
Hey, yeah, my name is Cheese Yeen. I run a small YouTube channel. I want to ask you a few questions about your job for a video where I directly compare your company to a fictional one best known for murdering several dozen children.
No idea why they never got back to me. In terms of insurance, there are companies that specialize in insuring FECs, and to sate my own curiosity, I did actually try calling a few to ask how much it would cost to cover such a massive, dangerous, and massively dangerous facility. But again, for some mysterious reason, they never got back to me.
Hey, yeah, quick question. What would my insurance premium look like for a 1.6 million square foot facility where we had roughly a dozen children go missing over the past few years? Just a hypothetical, please don't call the police.
But there are a number of insurances a business of this type would need, such as general liability, workers' comp, and commercial property insurance. Because we've already slapped hard values on the PP&E, this is all pretty straightforward and not that interesting to talk about, and really, the grand total for admin and insurance came out to not that much in general, $444,000. This is so low due to the fact that we're only looking at a single store, and with that boring line item out of the way, we've got just one more line item, one more expense to cover. Surely though, this one couldn't possibly be that much of an expense, not enough to offset the millions of dollars the Pizzaplex is raking in. But oh my little caterwauling chicklets, I've been leaving out one very important expense. One of the most obvious expenses when you think, how much would it cost to run a Five Nights at Freddy's location? We need to cover the annual cost of the animatronics. Ooh boy, you cannot imagine how excited I am to have just one line item left. And thankfully, unlike all the previous animatronic items, I know exactly how I'm going to approach this one, because it ties into everything I've established thus far. All the little details, all the pain, it all comes to a head right here. It's all connected. Starting with the shells, these are primarily going to be impacted by cosmetic maintenance, paint, makeup, filling, and cracks, etc. The cost of installing a wrap on a full-sized car, not counting for labor costs, is about $900. So let's say each shell needs a new coat of paint every year due to wear and tear associated with dancing, playing instruments, and dealing with disgusting, sticky children, and that's $900 per shell per year. In terms of cosmetics, which the animatronics canonically use, the average makeup user spends $85 a month on beauty products, not counting for the cost of appointments, as this is probably done in-house or by the animatronics themselves. That's another $1,020 per shell per year. As far as structural repairs, epoxy is the most recommended product to use, and it's super cheap and lasts a while, so I'm going to file that under petty cash and call it a day, bringing yearly expenses for the shells at $9,600 per year. This is actually a somewhat high expense, as we need to talk about a concept called percent RAV. Yes, we have one more business lesson to go over, don't worry, it's the last one. RAV is replacement asset value, or how much it would cost to entirely replace a complex asset. Percent RAV is any percentage which tracks how much an asset costs to maintain compared to its cost to replace. If my car cost me $10,000 and cost me $500 a year to maintain, that is a percent RAV of 5%. That's actually a very good percent RAV, as the golden standard for percent RAV is between 2 and 5%. The percent RAV of the shells, meanwhile, is closer to 19%. And now that's the Freddy Fazbear inefficiency I've been waiting for. And because I have no idea how to compute the repair costs for the daycare attendant and music man, I'm going to use this same 19% RAV for their maintenance values, being about $30,000 and $950,000 respectively. But that's still not too much now, is it? Not compared to the millions the Pizzaplex is taking in. Well, remember what we just discussed a moment ago? Their underqualified mechanics have no idea how to properly repair the endos or staff bots. That's why so many staff bots are just thrown into a pit or blown up in phaser blast. It's why so many endos are just wandering around with seemingly no purpose. And it's why the Freddy Dome is only ever shown fitting new shells onto endos, not repairing them. It's because they aren't repairing either. They're just throwing them out and replacing them. Yes! Inefficiency, comically inept inefficiency. I knew we'd find you somewhere. Typically, roughly 15 to 25% of vehicles and computers are replaced in a fleet per year, and that's for companies trying to hold on to assets for as long as they can. Fazbear Inc. clearly doesn't value these guys all that much, so doing my best guess, I'm going to say that they're getting rid of these guys at 2.5 times the normal replacement rate, meaning that on average they're replacing roughly 55% of their staff bots per year, and that's a total of just over $1.2 million in cost per year. Using the same calculation for the endos, that's another $3.3 million in costs, bringing the total animatronic costs up to $5.5 million per year. Now that is a lot of expensive hardware to just be throwing away every year, but in truth, I half expect the MegaPizzaPlex is actually just shipping away those endos to another location and reporting them as destroyed or salvaged, and god damn it, that's actually a super interesting form of financial fraud. Hell, I'd make it the hook for this video if I had any actual proof of that. But to get away from my love of fraud, the next number we need to calculate is, oh, you know what? That's the last number. The very last number needed for us to finally put this Fazbear to Fazbed. So I welcome you all to the Fazbear Inc. MegaPizzaPlex Annual Report on Form 10K for fiscal year ended December 2030 something. So I've got it. You want it. The final net income of the MegaPizzaPlex, calculated, collated, and now cooked, because I'm not giving it to you just yet. Because I need to remind you to subscribe to my new Let's Play. Nah, I'm just kidding. Let's get into it. For the total MegaPizzaPlex annual revenue, we have a whopping $215,400,000. Up against that, we have a total cost of products at $25,817,000, operating costs of $14,463,000, income taxes of $44 million, and property taxes of $268,000, bringing us to a final total of $130,107,709. That is a massive number for a single location. For comparison, the entire Dave & Buster's Corporation only took in a net income of $126 million in 2024. So why is this number so high? Did I get something wrong? Could it possibly be the case that the MegaPizzaPlex was never intended to be analyzed as a serious business and this was all just an exercise in futility? No! Because there are two major outliers that almost immediately explain the ridiculously high net income, and the first has to do with the most goddamn aggravating mechanic both in-game and for this video, those pasty white, monotone, child-grabbing, mime-looking staff bots. Despite costing the Pizzaplex $1.2 million a year to maintain, this is a fraction of what they would be paying in payroll and benefits. For many businesses, payroll is one of, if not the biggest expense on the balance sheet. Even for the Pizzaplex, their payroll expense is nearly $2 million, and this is a business with less than 50 employees. I then feel I need to remind you that this building is 1.6 million square feet, aka 27 football fields, and is staffed by less than 50 people. The vast majority of the staff are the 150 or so staff bots, and remember, one staff bot does not equal one employee. Bots don't need to take breaks, can seamlessly switch between jobs on a whim, and can work all 3 shifts from morning to evening to night. If we just do some quick math and say that one bot can replace 2.5 people, which I think is lowballing it honestly, and set these replaced people's salaries at the Pizzaplex average of $20.06 an hour, that's a whopping $15.6 million just in payroll costs saved, not even accounting for benefits. The second reason their income is so ridiculously high is because of the frankly baffling fact that the MegaPizzaPlex charges for admission into the main entertainment space and for other attractions. Remember, even at the incredibly low price of just $10 per entry ticket, that still nets them a whopping $22 million during a peak quarter. In fact, removing the attendance requirement more than halves their annual revenue. Then subtract the $15 million for payroll, that leaves us with just $53 million in annual profit. And this isn't even factoring in income tax, property tax, or the prior issues of accounts payable and accrued liabilities, which I'm not able to account for. Considering the building fixtures alone are valued at $46 million, this paints to me a very interesting picture. Without the staff bots reducing payroll costs to basically nothing, as well as the amazing name recognition of the Fazbear brand pulling in so many paying clients who are fine with paying for entry fee on top of attraction prices, the MegaPizzaPlex would find itself drowning in debt due to the massive loans taken out just to get the place up and running. But that's what a facility more grounded in reality would look like. In-game, we have a much different story of shoddy AI replacing human jobs and doing the morse, and people so blindly loyal to franchises and brands that they'll pay literally anything to immerse themselves in a world that just plasters familiar faces on a wall. And in that world, the MegaPizzaPlex is not only profitable, it's a veritable gold mine. But that brings us to the end of this video, and boy, what a journey. I think I can say that we've learned some things, had some laughs, but at the end of the day, it's two specific major takeaways I want to leave you with. One is that the people who created the MegaPizzaPlex, I mean the in real life level designers, not the fictional construction companies, deserve a lot of praise for such an incredibly detailed and beautiful environment. And two, that no amount of outrage over shady business practices and unethical employee treatment will ever beat out blind brand loyalty.